Welcome to 8th House Portal. The last time I spoke, I talked about the creator economy, and I want to move away from that because I'm quite done with that now. I want to talk about something I've become very passionate about, or I should say, a person, and his work, his legacy that he's left. But before we begin, I want you to remember something, not as a thought, but as a feeling. Go back not to a specific memory yet, but to a time when your body felt different, when the world didn't feel separate from you, when you didn't stand outside of life observing it, but you were inside of it. Notice this, the way your body moved back then. You didn't think about movement, you became it. Running didn't feel like exercise, right? It was like freedom. Touching something wasn't just physical, it was how you understood, and thinking wasn't what it is now. It wasn't structured or controlled or filtered. It lived in your body, in your imagination, in the way you felt the world before you could explain it. There was a time when you didn't need to separate what was real from what was meaningful because it was all the same thing. In anthroposophical understanding, childhood is not just a stage of development. It's a time when the human being is fully immersed in experience. Not learning through analysis, but through imitation, sensation, and presence. And somewhere along the way, something changed. You learned to step outside of that experience, to observe instead of feel, to explain instead of inhabit, to think about life instead of being within it. But here's a question I want to ask you. Did that part of you disappear, or did it simply become quiet? Maybe it didn't disappear. Maybe it became something quieter, something we were taught to move away from. But every once in a while, someone comes along who doesn't completely lose access to it. Not because they refused to grow and not because they remained a child, but because something in them continued to observe that deeper layer of experience, even as they matured. Rudolf Steiner was one of those individuals. By all outward measures, he became a highly disciplined adult, a philosopher, a scientist of thought, a teacher, and the founder of what he would later call anthroposophy. But in his own writings, he describes something unusual about his childhood. Not that he avoided growing up, but that from a very early age, he experienced the world in two ways at once. There was the outer world, so the one everyone could see, and then there was something else, a layer of experience that he felt was just as real, but far more difficult to explain. These are not ideas we can just verify in a scientific sense. They come from his own account, written later in life. But whether we interpret them as psychological, symbolic, or something more, they shaped everything he would go on to create. And it all begins with the way he perceived the world as a child. Every child enters the world with a nervous system that is still forming. So from around 5 weeks after conception, so the embryonic stage, the nervous system has already started to develop. By age 5, about 90% of the brain has grown. In that time period, we're still learning what is safe, what's predictable, and what can be trusted. Right? So in modern psychology, that's what we call attachment, right? The patterns we develop early in life through our relationships, especially with caregivers. So whether that's your parents, grandparents, whoever was there, right, in the beginning. These patterns don't just shape how we relate to people, they shape how we perceive the world itself, whether it feels coherent or fragmented or distant. Developmental psychology, that the research there shows that a child's environment, the emotional tone, stability, the relationships around them, that all plays a major role in shaping how they think and feel, and also how they interpret reality. The 25th of February, 1861, Rudolf Steiner was born in what is now Croatia. Back then, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He had a younger sister, born in 1864, Leopoldine, and a younger brother, born in 1866, Gustav. I like, when I was reading his autobiography, I like how he mentions in 1867, he was about 7 years old, and he was at the village school, and there was an accusation made by the headmaster's wife, and she accused Steiner of creating a commotion. Now, for some reason, I remember reading somewhere that it was actually a headmaster's son that created a commotion and somehow blamed it on Steiner. I'm not sure where I read that because I went back to look for it and I cannot find if now I'm imagining that or what. If anyone knows, please leave a comment and correct me. In any case, his father got wind of this situation and went to the school and had a talk and a disagreement with the headmaster about the incident. And that led to his father taking him out of school and giving his son a homeschool education. His father seemed to value discipline and practical knowledge, and he definitely supported Steiner's continued learning. And this homeschool education would allow Steiner to develop a deep focus and concentration and reflection and independent thinking. Apparently, around 8 years of age, he was, I think he may have gone to a different school when they moved, but he was considered, they had said he had unorthodoxy of his writing and spelling and had to do extra lessons. I mean, we've all known some people that, 9, 8, 9, 10, they still had terrible handwriting. Listen, every child develops differently. Some are good at math early on and terrible at writing, and vice versa. And they bloom later on. Every child is different. Not every child is made standard. Okay, we're all unique. But around the age of 9, he had met a teacher he kind of looked up to, and he borrowed a book from this tutor and discovered geometry, which Steiner states brought him inner happiness. And this same tutor allowed him to draw, which is where the artistic element enters in his education. And there is research that supports, I'm sure most people have heard of this, it supports how drawing helps children develop symbolic thought, that visual spatial reasoning, and also the early foundations of math and reading. Drawing also contributes to memory retention, that visual encoding, the motor activity, the meaning making, that all creates stronger neural connections. And it also helps children express emotions that they can't verbalize. It allows them to process stress as well, or, if they have difficulty expressing themselves, to release that. So basically, it helps with emotional regulation. And then, of course, the obvious, it helps with fine motor development. All these neural pathways linking the motor cortex, the visual cortex, all of that fine motor skill development has a strong correlation to later academic success. And drawing usually comes before writing anyway. It helps children organize thoughts and explain things. Moving back to his life, in 1871, Steiner became a church child. However, his parents were not religious, which I found interesting. I guess he went to Catholic church. I would have thought that he was raised in like a Catholic home, but no, his parents weren't particularly religious. I noticed from reading about his childhood, besides his father, he would really seek exceptional characters. So He would notice an exceptional mentor or teacher in his environment and really look up to them. And usually those individuals had shared knowledge or an interest in science or philosophy. He also became the priest's favorite, and he was described as an exceptional character. And that same priest introduced Steiner to things like the heliocentric cosmology. Actually, while he was still an altar boy, there was an incident that I think he was 8 or 9 years old. There was trouble that arose due to Steiner and several other boys being late for a service on one particular morning. So, because of that tardiness, there was an apparent scheduled thrashing at the school. You have to remember, school and church were intertwined. Right? Like whatever happened at school, they were going to know about it at church, and vice versa. So, can you imagine having thrashings in our time? That would not go well. And not just because like the parents would have something to say about it, but I just think the generation of children wouldn't be able to handle that type of punishment. Um, culturally, but just the generation of kids wouldn't be able to take that punishment and then move forward in life, and become better or stronger. I just don't think it would work the same. That's a whole other topic, though. Anyway, during that time, his dad got wind of this situation and went to the church, and he intervened. This led his father to forbid him to return to church. And based on his own descriptions, he experienced himself as somewhat separate from others, deeply inward and highly perceptive of things that others didn't seem to notice. And in modern terms, we might kind of interpret this as a form of introspective adaptation, where a child develops a rich inner world alongside maybe a response to the external environment. We'll say something like, "Oh, this child has an enormous imagination." I remember, it brings me back. I remember when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I was on my grandparents' veranda, and the sun was setting, and so it had this beautiful orangey, warm hue. And I remember it like it was last week, to be honest with you. For whatever reason, I have like scenes of my childhood, vividly. Not everything, just specific moments. And I was sitting on the veranda with my friend, and I'm not sure if I should explain the whole thing, but kind of weird. But I don't know where we got yogurt from, but we did. And for whatever reason, we were putting this yogurt on our knees. And it ended up on our lower legs as well. We were wearing shorts, so whatever. And we were in deep conversation. I remember talking to him about something. We were really into it. And I wish I could remember what the discussion was about. But in any case, we were talking away, putting this yogurt on our knees. And my grandmother kind of appeared. And I think she stood there for a few seconds, just kind of watching me. And I just heard her in her sweet voice going, "Annalene, who are you talking to?" And I said, "Talking to my friend. We're playing." In the back of my mind, I'm like, well, obviously, we're playing. Here's my friend right next to me. And she says, "Oh, okay." And then she kind of disappeared back into the house and left me to continue. Now, of course, she didn't see my friend. Okay. So they called him my imaginary friend, but I had seen him many times, and he was definitely next to me because I remember what he looked like. I can literally tell you the color of his hair and his eyes. But it was interesting to now look back at this and say, no, I remember playing with my friend, and everyone else is like, "No, you had an imaginary friend." Anyway, going back to Steiner and his life. In 1872, he transferred to a grammar school in Wiener Neustadt, and in 1873 to 75, he taught himself analytical geometry, trigonometry, differential equations, and calculus. That's a lot of math. Um, I did have to teach myself calculus in high school, actually. That's a whole other story. But I mean, he must have loved math, right? In 1876, he started to tutor students. In 78, he studied extensively contemporary psychology and philosophy. And in 1879, he graduated high school with honors. And I believe around that time, his dad had moved to Vienna because of his job. And so Steiner took a trip to Vienna, and he apparently, as he said, purchased a great number of philosophy books. So Fichte, Schilling, Hegel, and apparently his goal was to find a path from the I to nature. So what he means is how to find the inner self and relate it to the outer world. In 1879, he attended technical college in Vienna for maths, chemistry, physics, mineralogy, botany, zoology, geology, and he did that with a scholarship. He also lectured in history and literature, so he was an extremely intelligent being. He also started attending lectures on Schiller and Goethe. He met somebody called Kagusky, a herb gatherer and a healer who he ended up studying with throughout his time in Vienna. In 1881, he writes, I pursue a quite specific goal and idealistic aim, knowledge of the truth. Isn't that what some of us have been trying to do? He was asked to edit Goethe's scientific works at the Wiener Goethe archive, and we can see how this period of his life is transition from student to independent thinker. Well, I guess he was always an independent thinker, wasn't he? But that leading to an emerging intellectual. And because Steiner deeply resonated with Goethe's holistic approach to science, it helped shape his approach to nature and perception and knowledge. Steiner also focused quite a bit on epistemology, so it was the study of knowledge, right? And he started to form his own core philosophical position. His first major work, Truth and Knowledge, was developed around this time and was written as part of his doctoral work. And we see that he was very self directed in philosophy. His work, he's also his work tutoring a boy that had developmental challenges was also very important because it influenced his work in education later on and the foundations of Waldorf pedagogy. He also describes this time of his life as one of deep inner discipline, structured thinking, and attempting to bring clarity to his earlier experiences. Kind of sounds like where I'm at right now. He was also engaged in literary circles, made friendships with important thinkers of that time. He was involved in intellectual discussion culture in Vienna at the time, but he also remained independent and inwardly focused. And I will say, I'm not just talking about Steiner, but anybody really who, someone who's able to go into have these discussions with other people and really truly listen and discuss subjects or theories and whatnot, but still come out having your own stance on something, your own unique perspective. Um, that can be quite the skill, actually, not to be influenced so much by other people. So I find that quite admirable. Here's a question I want to ask. What happens to a child who sees too much? Not in like the physical sense, because that's like a whole other topic, but the inner sense. What happens when someone perceives meaning where others see nothing? And maybe more importantly, what happens to that part of us when we grow up? Now, if I go back to that story of my friend and I on the veranda, um, I could clearly see him. Okay, he had these he had this black hair and these blue eyes. He had blue shorts on. Like, imagine if my grandmother didn't just leave me to continue and started to question me or forced me to admit that he wasn't real. What would that have done to me as a child? Especially when I can see him right there next to me. But she didn't. She let me be a child, right? And she let me be me. It actually brings to mind a movie. One of my favorite movies actually. It's called Return to Oz. I prefer that movie over the first one. But in that movie, Dorothy was taken to a sanitarium due to her constantly telling stories of a magical land called Oz, and her aunt thinks it's happening due to this traumatic loss of the farm. And she was supposed to have this electric shock therapy, right? But fortunately, there was a thunderstorm that created a voltage surge, and she was able to escape. Now, I know that there are parents out there that when they see their kids, in this imaginative play, they stop them. They actually tell them, no, this isn't real. I really don't think that's necessary. Let the child stay in their world. I mean, there's a reason for it. There's no need to push and force adulthood on them. Going back to Steiner, from a very young age, so maybe around 8, he described how he experienced two layers of reality simultaneously: the sensory, so the physical world, and the non sensory, spiritual world. Um, and the spiritual world was as real to him as the physical one. Around 7 years of age, so somewhere in a distant town, actually, his aunt had died, but he had no idea. He had no knowledge of this incident. And she actually, from what has been shared, she ended up taking her own life. So Steiner, at the time, being around 7 years of age, him and his family were in this train station waiting room, and an apparition of his aunt appeared. Now, at that point, he didn't know it was his aunt, but he saw her appear. Okay. Now, what do I mean by apparition? That's just a spirit of a dead person that is appearing in a form that can be seen. So she appeared to him, gesturing for him to help, and apparently said, "Try to do all you can do for me now and later." And then she vanished into the stove. And later on, Steiner and his family found out that his aunt had died. And that led him to understand the connection of the experience he had, and the connection as well to his clairvoyant abilities. He had an unusual awareness from a young age of his own thinking processes and his inner experiences. And he would later use in his life these experiences and observations as foundations for what he called spiritual science, an attempt to study consciousness with the same seriousness as we study the physical world. Now, think about your own childhood for a moment. Before you learned what was real, what was acceptable, what made sense to other people, what did you notice that you no longer allow yourself to see? Was it a feeling? Was it a sensitivity? Maybe it was a kind of knowing you couldn't explain. And when did you decide to stop trusting it? Steiner believed that human beings are not just passive observers of reality. They are participants in it. Now, there are some people, I would say, that like to intellectualize things instead of experiencing it or feeling something fully. Or there are some people, it's just part of their personality. They enjoy the deep thinking. Have introverts, lots of internal processing, reflection before acting out. It doesn't mean avoidance, but sometimes I think some people do avoid feeling an experience. And you have some of us that are aware of our thinking, so metacognition. But completely detaching or disconnecting or avoiding feeling, I personally don't think is healthy. That thinking in itself, it's not just a brain function, but a bridge between the physical and something deeper. And if that is true, then losing that childlike perception isn't just growing up. It might actually be a kind of forgetting. Have you ever listened to the questions children ask? When I work with children, sometimes I love the questions they ask. They are so intelligent and deep and magical. And, I know that there are answers to all of their questions. I remember one young boy, I don't remember how the conversation began, but I ended up telling him about spaghettification. And for whatever reason, he wasn't sure if he was to believe me or not. Maybe because the word sounds kind of funny, right? But boy, was he intrigued, because his question led to something really interesting that he didn't expect, right? That part of you that once asked different questions and didn't need permission to do it. What if that part of you was never wrong? Now, this part of the episode is going to be quite different from what I've done previously. It's kind of a warning, really. I'm going to go into a guided meditative exercise. It's a short exercise inspired by Steiner's emphasis on strengthening thinking as a spiritual organ. You don't have to do this. It's only for those who are interested. So you can, if you're not interested, you can skip to the next part of this. For those who are interested, whether you've done meditation or or you haven't, this warning goes to all of you. If some of you have done Steiner's meditative, if you're a meditant, okay, you understand that this is serious. It's not a joke. It's not a game. Don't start doing this if you're not serious about it. I'm starting off with what I would consider more basic of an exercise. I don't want to overwhelm anyone that might want to join, but I want to emphasize this is not a game. Okay, this is for people that are serious about taking this path. And you do not want to be listening to these or doing this when you are driving. Please don't do that. It won't end well. You don't want to do this if you're working machinery. You do it when you're home, in a safe place, somewhere quiet, so you can focus. If you are a sensitive person, or if you're not, because I'll be honest, I'm somebody that meditates, and when I started to follow this path, I will say things happened that I did not expect, even in what you would call something simple like this exercise we're about to try. I would warn, if any of you, especially if you're sensitive, if you start to become overwhelmed for whatever reason, something pops up, and you need to take a step back, just gently come out of it and do some deep breathing to calm yourself down. This is not for everybody. You cannot force being on the path. You cannot do that. It doesn't work like that. It's kind of like you can't force the alchemical process, okay? It happens naturally. And if you're struggling, if you're really becoming emotional, you need to maybe take a step back, right? So find a quiet place, somewhere safe. You're not driving, you're not working. Okay. So let's begin. Find a comfortable, upright position. Both feet on the ground. Gently elongate your spine. And allow your breath to settle into its natural rhythm. We begin with something very simple. bring awareness to the act of thinking itself. Not the thoughts, but the activity of thinking. Notice how a thought appears, perhaps about your day, perhaps about this episode. Instead of following the thought, observe the space in which thinking happens. Now, gently bring to mind a simple object, a seed. Visualize the seed clearly, its shape, its structure. Its quiet potential. Hold the image steadily. If your mind wanders, just gently return to the seed. We are strengthening the capacity to guide attention consciously. Now, consider within the seed exists an entire plant. Roots, stem, leaves, flower, fruit. All of this lives invisibly within the seed. All of this lives invisibly within the seed. Let the seed become a symbol, a reminder that what is unseen is not unreal. Rest with this image quietly. Gently release the image. Return your awareness to breath. To your body. To the room. If your eyes were closed, you can open them gently. Carry with you the recognition. Thinking can become a bridge when guided with care. It becomes perception. Some of you that may have tried that exercise, it sounded like it could be easy, right? Sometimes just holding onto that one thought can be quite difficult. But if you keep doing this every day, 3-4 minutes, you will be exercising your sensory organ, right? Your spiritual organs. It's a really good exercise. And if you're able to do that, I mean, by the end of the month, you'll notice how differently your thinking becomes. We're living in a time of extraordinary acceleration, especially now that Uranus is in Gemini, right? Artificial intelligence, digital immersion, biotechnology, economic instability, ecological uncertainty. Human attention is increasingly fragmented. Steiner warned that the greatest danger of modernity would not be materialism itself, but unconscious materialism. Human beings forgetting that thinking itself is alive. When thinking becomes passive, okay, external forces are going to shape your perception. But when our thinking can become active, human freedom becomes possible. The question isn't whether technology advances. It will. The question becomes, will human consciousness advance alongside it? Anthroposophy offers a framework for inner development that keeps pace with external change. Without inner development, technology will amplify confusion. With inner development, technology can serve evolution. Steiner repeatedly emphasized small, consistent practices, not dramatic displays, spiritual displays. It's not necessary. But quiet discipline. Concrete steps like strengthening attention intentionally, like the exercise we just did. Engage thinking actively rather than passively consuming information. Seeking knowledge that integrates science and ethics and spiritual insight. Supporting education and agriculture that can respect human development and this living earth. Or cultivating inner responsibility for how we participate in culture. The future that Steiner pointed towards is participatory. It doesn't just come here automatically. It is built through individuals who take inner work seriously. For those who feel called to walk this path more intentionally, I am working right now on preparing a deeper practice space, guided exercises, reflection materials, also study groups, because I find that during the week or weeks, when you're trying to do this, sometimes you need to reach out to somebody and, ask questions or share something. And there can be that gap of needing to communicate with others. But I'm working on something. It's quite big and it involves a lot of techie stuff. And I think I've become so overwhelmed, I just literally just stopped working on it. So at some point, I need to get back into it because I want to make this something. It's something important to me, and I'm sure that others will appreciate what I'm creating. You have to remember Steiner emphasized that spiritual development unfolds in community as well as in solitude. Maybe if this episode resonated with some of you, you might feel that it's not just simply information I'm sharing, um, but an invitation. Moving forward the next few weeks, try to carry one quiet question. When I think, am I truly awake inside my thinking? Or am I being carried by it? Notice moments when your thinking becomes more deliberate, more present, more alive. I know the last couple of weeks for myself, there's been so much going on. And I'll be honest, there's something that's popped up into existence in my life that it's been quite the distraction, I'll say that. Uh, but I'm like that. I'm a Pisces. So, I mean, my mind kind of wanders as well, but there's so many things I have going on as well. So it did become overwhelming, and I'm literally taking a week away from certain things to focus on getting back on track with certain um, parts of life. I'm hoping this episode helped introduce Rudolf Steiner to some of you who may not have heard of him or know of him. And maybe it's opened another world for some of you that I can only hope will help your life. Until next time, take care.